My name is Alex, and for as long as I can remember, my life had been about discipline, control, and silence. I grew up in a household where laughter felt like a luxury and freedom was something you read about in books, not something you lived. My parents raised me with strict rules, where every action was measured and every step was weighed against what society would think. I was taught early on that distractions were dangerous, that emotions only weakened you, and that a woman's worth was tied to her reputation. So I kept my head down. I never indulged in what others my age did. No late-night chats, no secret crushes, no adventurous outings. While other girls my age whispered about love, shared giggles about crushes, and even took risks in the name of fun, I remained apart, standing like a quiet observer on the outside of their world. My only focus was work. My job was not just a career. It was my shield, my purpose, and my escape from the suffocating walls of home. People often told me I was too serious, too detached. "Alex, don't you ever get tired of working so hard?" my colleagues would ask. I'd just smile faintly and shake my head, never bothering to explain that for me. Work was the only place where I felt even a little free. At least in the office, I could breathe without constant eyes on me, without the endless lectures about duty and honor. My boss was a woman in her late 20s, perhaps early 30s, though she carried herself with a poise that made her seem older in wisdom yet younger in spirit. To everyone else she was strict, firm, and unbending. She never tolerated laziness or excuses, and her gaze could silence a noisy room instantly. But beneath that exterior, I had glimpsed something softer, an almost invisible tenderness that only revealed itself in fleeting moments. Sometimes when she walked past my desk, she would pause to glance at my work, her voice gentle in a way it never was with others as she said, "Good job, Alex. Keep this up." It wasn't much, but to me, it was like a rare beam of sunlight sneaking through heavy clouds. There were times when I worked late, long after the office had emptied. She would come out of her cabin and find me still at my desk, hunched over files. Instead of scolding me, she would place a cup of tea beside me and say quietly, "Don't tire yourself out too much." Then she would disappear before I could even thank her. Back then, I never thought deeply about these moments. I simply assumed she was being kind, perhaps appreciative of my dedication. Love or anything close to it never even crossed my mind. My world had no room for such emotions. I dismissed them as trivial, as weaknesses that people like me couldn't afford. And yet, sometimes I'd catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her eyes carried something unspoken, something heavy, but whenever I tried to meet her gaze, she would quickly look away and busy herself with papers or her computer. I convinced myself it was my imagination, that maybe she was just checking to see if I was working efficiently. There were subtle things I overlooked. On days when I was unusually quiet, she would linger a little longer near my desk, as if waiting for me to open up. When I skipped lunch, she would send someone to place food on my table, pretending it was leftover from a meeting. And when I was sick one winter, she personally walked me out of the office, calling a cab and insisting, "Go home, Alex. Rest. Work can wait." I never questioned why she cared so much. I never let myself wonder. My mind was conditioned to stay away from such thoughts, to keep emotions buried where they couldn't disturb my balance. But now, when I look back, I realize how blind I was. Every look, every small act of care, every moment of silence carried a meaning I refused to see. She wasn't just my boss. She was someone who felt for me in ways I couldn't comprehend then. At the time, though, I simply carried on with my rigid life. She was my boss, I was her employee. Nothing more, nothing less. Or so I believed. It all began so suddenly, without warning, as most things in my family often did. One evening, I came home from work exhausted, already rehearsing in my head the reports I needed to finish the next day. But the moment I stepped inside, I sensed a different atmosphere. My mother was sitting upright in the drawing room, her face unusually bright. My father's expression carried a weighty satisfaction I had seen only on rare occasions. "Alex," my mother said, her voice almost too soft to belong to her. "Some people came today. They liked you." I froze, still holding my bag, my mind struggling to keep up with her words. Liked me. For what? I asked, though the answer was clear before the question even left my lips. For marriage, of course, my father replied, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. A good family. Respectable people. They saw your photo and said yes immediately. The boy works in finance, settled, decent background. We have given them our word. Just like that. As if my future was nothing more than a business deal, signed and sealed in my absence. I wanted to protest. A part of me wanted to shout that I wasn't ready, that I had never even thought of marriage. But the air in my house had always been suffocating with duty and obedience. I knew what was expected of me. To resist would mean endless arguments, lectures about honor, and reminders of sacrifices they had made for me. So instead I just sat down quietly, my hands cold in my lap, and whispered, "If this is what you've decided, then fine. I will agree." There was no excitement in my heart, no flutter of happiness that people said came with the thought of marriage. I felt only a hollow sense of responsibility, as though I was signing a contract that had nothing to do with me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My friends often spoke about marriage as a dream, a step into love and companionship. But to me, it felt like another rule to follow, another duty to perform. I tried to convince myself it was for the best, that maybe love wasn't necessary, maybe care and responsibility were enough. Hadn't I always lived like this? Quietly, obediently, fulfilling what was asked of me. But beneath those thoughts, there was a gnawing emptiness. I felt like I was drifting into something unknown, without even the right to ask questions. The next morning at the office, I went about my tasks mechanically, but my mind was clouded. I watched couples in the cafeteria laugh together, share small inside jokes, or exchange tender looks when they thought no one was watching. It struck me then. I had never experienced that, not even once. My life had been about checklists and deadlines, never about stolen glances or whispered promises. I wondered if marriage would change that for me. Would I feel something new with this man my parents had chosen? Or would it be just another extension of duty, a continuation of the silence I had always carried? The thought pressed on me heavily, so much so that by the end of the week I made a decision. If I was to marry and start this new chapter, I couldn't stay in the same office. My job had been my sanctuary, but it was also a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The routines, the faces, the comfort. It would only make me compare, only remind me of what I had lost, even if I didn't yet know what that was. So I decided to put in a request for a transfer, to move to another branch after my marriage. It felt logical, almost necessary. I didn't want to mix my old life with my new one. I didn't even stop to think how my boss would react, though deep down I dreaded telling her. That evening, as I sat at my desk finishing my last file, I glanced towards her cabin. She was inside, her face half lit by the warm glow of her desk lamp. Her fingers pressed against her temple as she read through papers. There was something about her posture, tired but determined, that made me pause. For a fleeting second I wanted to knock on her door, sit down and confess everything. The proposal, the marriage, the way I felt trapped but too bound by duty to resist. But I didn't. I reminded myself she was my boss, not my confidant. And besides, what would she say? That I should run away from my responsibilities. That I should refuse my parents' decision. It was unthinkable. So I stayed silent. I buried my feelings the way I always had, preparing myself to move forward as if nothing had happened. Still, there was a quiet ache inside me. Every time she walked past me, every time her hand brushed lightly against my desk as she left a note, every time her voice softened when she spoke my name, I felt something stir, something I refused to name. Perhaps if I had looked closer then, I would have seen the truth hiding in her eyes. Perhaps I would have realized that what I thought was kindness was something far deeper, far more fragile. But I was blind, too wrapped in duty to notice love even when it was standing right in front of me. And so, with a heavy heart, I decided to prepare for marriage, to accept what had been chosen for me. I thought it was the only path available. I had no idea that the choices I made in silence would shape not only my life but hers as well. The day I finally gathered the courage to approach my boss about the transfer, my heart pounded harder than it should have. It wasn't that I feared her reaction. She had always been fair, professional, and respectful. But there was something about the thought of leaving this office, of leaving her, that weighed heavily on me. I told myself it was only because I had grown attached to the environment, to the rhythm of the place. Still, a part of me hesitated with every step toward her cabin. When I pushed open the door, the sight that greeted me froze me in place. She was sitting at her desk, but she wasn't composed as she usually was. Her shoulders trembled, her face buried in her hands. Silent sobs shook her body, though the sound that escaped was muffled, raw, and desperate. I had never seen her like that. My boss, who was always so strong, so in control, was crumbling in front of me. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I whispered, my voice trembling with shock. She didn't look up. Her fingers pressed harder against her face as if hiding herself from me, as though my presence had caught her in a moment she could never explain. I stepped closer, forgetting entirely the reason I had come. "What happened? Please tell me. Is everything okay? Did something happen at work? At home?" My questions spilled out one after another, frantic, searching. But she remained silent. Only her shoulders moved with the force of her sobs, her breathing uneven, almost painful to listen to. I felt helpless, standing there like an intruder. I had always known her as strong, composed, almost untouchable. To see her like this broke something inside me. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, lowering my voice. "You don't have to hide it. You can tell me. Maybe I can help." Still nothing. She only shook her head, as though begging me not to ask further. For a long moment we sat in silence. The only sound was her muffled crying, and my heart beating too loudly in my chest. I didn't know what else to do, so I waited, hoping she would find her voice. But when she finally did lift her face, her eyes were red, her lashes wet, and her lips trembled as though words wanted to escape but couldn't. I wanted to reach across the desk, to wipe away the tears, to hold her steady. But the boundaries of who we were, boss and employee, held me back. So instead, I clasped my hands together tightly on my lap and said softly, I actually came here for something else. I need to talk to you about my transfer. After my marriage, I'll be moving, so I thought it best to request a change in posting." The moment the word marriage left my mouth, something flickered in her eyes. Pain, sharp, undeniable, and deep. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the papers in front of her. For a second, she stared at them as though the inked letters blurred before her eyes. Then, with hands that shook, she picked up a pen. "Ma'am, are you sure you're okay?" I asked again, watching her struggle to even hold the pen steady. She didn't answer. She simply bent down and signed her name at the bottom of the form. Her signature, usually so strong and precise, looked shaky, uneven, as if each stroke cost her something. When she slid the paper back toward me, her hands lingered on it for a fraction too long, as though reluctant to let it go. Then she pulled back quickly, retreating into silence. I picked it up slowly, my chest tight. "Thank you," I murmured, though the words felt empty in the thick atmosphere of that room. "And whatever it is that's troubling you, I hope you find peace soon." She looked at me then, her eyes glistening, her lips parting slightly as though she wanted to speak. For the briefest moment I thought she would tell me. That she would share the burden of her silence. That she would let me into the hidden chambers of her heart. But nothing came. She closed her lips again, swallowing whatever words had risen, and lowered her gaze back to her desk. I stood there for another second, torn between waiting and walking away. The weight of her silence pressed heavily on me, confusing me, unsettling me. Finally, I turned and left, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. The paper in my hand felt heavier than it should have, almost like it carried more than just a transfer approval. It carried something unfinished, something unsaid, something that made my chest ache. As I stepped out into the evening air, a strange heaviness followed me. I told myself it was just guilt for leaving behind the office I had grown attached to, but deep down I knew it was more. Her tears, her trembling hands, her silence, they haunted me. Even then, I didn't understand the truth. I didn't know that the reason for her tears was me, that the silence she clung to was her only way of protecting her heart. All I knew was that something was breaking between us, something fragile I couldn't name. And though I walked away that day with my transfer in hand, a part of me stayed behind in that office, sitting silently with her in the glow of her desk lamp, in the space where words were never spoken but feelings lived, raw and unacknowledged. 2 years passed, though it never truly felt like I had moved forward. On paper I was married, settled, and living the life my parents had wanted for me. But in my heart, I lived like a guest in my own home. My husband was kind in his own way, but distant. Our relationship built more on routine than affection. We shared a roof but not a world. Nights passed in silence, mornings began with empty greetings, and slowly, an invisible wall grew between us. I often found myself sitting by the window at night, staring out into the dark, wondering if this was what marriage was supposed to feel like. Everyone had promised me that love would follow, that companionship would grow, but it didn't. All I felt was emptiness, a dull ache that no words could ease. It was on one such afternoon when I had gone out for groceries that I unexpectedly met an old friend from my previous office. We hadn't spoken in years, but the moment she saw me, her face lit up. "Alex!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. We sat at a cafe nearby, catching up on little things, her new job, my married life. But as the conversation flowed, she suddenly lowered her voice, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that unsettled me. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked softly. I blinked. "About who?" "Your old boss," she said, almost whispering, as though speaking her name carried too much weight. "Do you know, she loved you?" The words hit me like a storm. For a moment I thought I had misheard. "What?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She loved you, Alex. Everyone in the office knew except you. After you left, she cried for weeks. She was devastated. Even now, I hear she still remembers you, that she hasn't been the same since." The cafe around me blurred. The sound of clinking cups, the murmur of voices, all of it faded under the weight of those words. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. Images flashed in my mind. Her tears that day in her cabin, her trembling hand as she signed my transfer, the way her gaze always lingered on me when she thought I wasn't watching. "Oh my God!" I whispered, pressing a hand against my lips. She loved me." My friend nodded gently, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Yes, she just never told you. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she thought you wouldn't accept it. But her love was real. You were the only one who didn't see it." I sat there frozen, my heart breaking into pieces I hadn't even known existed. Every moment replayed in my head with brutal clarity. The cups of tea she left on my desk, the way she insisted I rest when I was sick, the softness in her voice when she spoke my name. All of it, signs I had dismissed, now screamed the truth I had been too blind to see. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring everything. If she had told me," I said brokenly. "If she had just said one word, maybe I would have married her instead. Maybe my life wouldn't feel so empty now." My friend reached out, squeezing my hand, but her comfort only deepened the ache. The guilt was unbearable. How could I not have seen it? How could I have walked away, leaving her in tears, never realizing that every sob, every silence, was for me? That night, I lay awake beside my husband, who slept peacefully, unaware of the storm raging inside me. My mind drifted back to her face, those tear-filled eyes, the way her lips trembled as though holding back words she could never speak. I buried my face into my pillow, finally allowing the sobs to escape. I whispered into the darkness, words meant only for her. "If only you had told me. I would have stayed. I would have chosen you." The emptiness I had lived with for 2 years now had a name. It was her. It had always been her. And though distance and silence separated us, I realized then that she was the love I had never known, the love I had lost before it could even begin. 4 days after, I carried the weight of that revelation. Every task, every routine felt hollow. I went through the motions of married life, but inside I was unraveling. The world saw a dutiful wife, but in my heart I was a grieving lover, for a love that had never been spoken yet had always existed. And in the quietest corners of my mind, I asked myself over and over, was it too late? Could love that was left unsaid ever find its voice again? I couldn't live with the silence anymore. After my friend's words, after the truth had pierced my heart, something inside me refused to settle. Days turned into weeks of restless nights, of lying awake imagining her face, her tears, her loneliness. The guilt was unbearable, but beneath it was also an ache, a pull so strong that I couldn't ignore it any longer. 2 years had passed, but I needed to see her again. I needed to look into her eyes and hear the truth from her lips, even if it broke me all over again. I found myself standing outside the old office building one late afternoon. My hands trembled as I held my bag against me, staring up at the familiar glass windows. Nothing had changed, the same security guard at the door, the same flower pots lining the entrance, but for me everything was different. My heart raced as I pushed through the doors, each step echoing with memories I had buried but never forgotten. When I reached her cabin I froze. Through the glass wall I saw her. She was sitting at her desk as she always had, but she looked older somehow, not in years but in spirit. Her face seemed more tired, her shoulders heavier. Yet when she glanced up and saw me standing there, everything changed. Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across them before they filled with a storm of emotions. Shock, fear, joy, and something deeper that nearly stole my breath. She stood up slowly, as if afraid I was just a dream that might vanish. "Alex," she whispered, her voice breaking. I stepped inside, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Hello," I managed, though my voice was soft, trembling. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she crossed the room in quick, unsteady steps and stopped just inches away from me. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, vulnerable. "You came back," she said, almost like a prayer. I nodded, tears already slipping down my cheeks. I had to. I couldn't stay away anymore, not after what I learned. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, and before I could think, I reached for her hand. It was warm, trembling, familiar. The touch alone unraveled me. "I know everything now," I whispered. "I know why you cried that day, why you stayed silent. A friend told me, she told me you loved me." My voice broke, and the tears came freely. "Is it true?" Her face crumpled, and in the next instant, she pulled me into her arms. The hug was desperate, fierce, like she had been holding it back for years. "Yes," she choked out against my shoulder. "Yes, Alex, it's true. I loved you. I still love you. I loved you in silence because I was afraid to lose you if I spoke. And in the end, I lost you anyway." I clung to her, my body shaking with sobs. Hearing her say the words was both agony and relief, like a wound reopening only to finally be cleaned. "Why didn't you tell me?" cried. "Why did you let me go without saying anything?" She pulled back just enough to cup my face in her hands. Her thumbs brushed away my tears as she looked into my eyes with unbearable tenderness. "Because I thought you would leave me if I confessed. I thought you'd see me differently, think I was wrong, that I had ruined everything between us. I chose silence, thinking it would keep you close. But silence took you away from me." I shook my head, gripping her wrists tightly. "If only you had told me," I whispered through tears. "I would never have left. I would never have agreed to that marriage. I would have chosen you." Her tears spilled then, sliding down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead to mine. "Don't say that. Don't make it harder," she murmured, her voice breaking. "But it's the truth," I said firmly, even though my voice trembled. "All those little moments, your care, your kindness, I see them differently now. I was too blind, too tied by duty to understand. But if you had said just one word, everything would have been different." We stood there, holding each other, our tears mingling, the silence between us finally filled with words that had been buried for too long. The pain was sharp, but alongside it came a strange sense of peace. The truth was finally out, no longer hidden, no longer suffocating us. She stroked my hair gently, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Do you hate me for staying silent?" I shook my head, burying my face against her shoulder. "No, I could never hate you. I only hate the silence that kept us apart." For a long while we just stayed like that, two broken souls finding comfort in each other's arms. It felt as though the world outside didn't exist, as though time had finally paused to let us breathe. When we finally pulled apart, her eyes lingered on mine with a mixture of sorrow and longing. "It's too late now, isn't it?" she asked softly. I couldn't answer. My heart screamed no, but my reality whispered yes. Yet, in that moment I didn't care about rules, about labels, about the life I was supposed to live. All I cared about was her, standing in front of me, her love finally spoken. "It doesn't matter what the world says," I told her quietly, squeezing her hand. "All that matters is that we know the truth now. That I know how much you loved me. And that you know I love you too." Her breath caught, and she stared at me as if she couldn't believe the words. Then, slowly, a fragile smile curved her lips through her tears. She pulled me into her arms again, holding me as though she would never let go. And for the first time in years I felt whole. The days that followed our reunion blurred into something both fragile and intoxicating. What had started as a hesitant meeting soon turned into long afternoons, then evenings, then nights spent together. I found myself making excuses to see her, slipping away from the life that had been chosen for me, and stepping into the life my heart had been craving all along. We would meet in quiet cafes where no one knew us, where the dim lights and soft music created a world of our own. Sometimes we sat in silence, our hands brushing against each other on the table, the air thick with unspoken words. Other times we would talk endlessly about work, about memories, about all the little things we had never shared before. One evening, she cooked for me at her apartment. I still remember the nervous smile on her face as she opened the door, apron tied loosely around her waist. "It's nothing special," she said shyly. "Just something simple." But when I tasted it, I laughed through the tears threatening to escape. "It's perfect," I told her, and she blushed in a way that made my heart stumble. After dinner, we sat on her couch, the city lights flickering faintly through the curtains. We talked about our childhoods, our families, our fears. Hours slipped by unnoticed. At some point, she leaned back and sighed, her head resting against the cushion. I found myself watching her, memorizing the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the way her lips curved softly even in thought. She caught me staring and smiled. "What?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head, suddenly shy. "Nothing. I never realized how easy it feels to be with you." Her eyes softened, and she reached out, her fingers grazing mine before slowly intertwining with them. The warmth of her hand was steady, grounding, and yet it sent a shiver through me. We sat like that for a long time, our hands clasped tightly, as if we could anchor each other against the tides of a world we had both been lost in. One night, after a long conversation, I grew quiet. I had been speaking of my marriage. The emptiness, the silence, the absence of love. My voice cracked when I admitted, "I've never felt cared for. Not like this. Not like you." Her eyes glistened, and she reached forward, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. She leaned in and pressed her lips gently to my forehead. It was such a tender, reverent gesture that I nearly broke into tears. My eyes fluttered shut as I breathed her in, my heart aching with the weight of everything I had missed. When she pulled back, I whispered, "Why does it feel like I'm only learning what love is now?" Her fingers lingered on my cheek. "Because sometimes we don't recognize love until it's standing right in front of us," she said softly. "Sometimes it takes losing everything else to finally see it." From then on, every moment carried a quiet intimacy. We walked together in the evenings, our shoulders brushing as the city hummed around us. We shared inside jokes, little smiles that belonged to no one else. Sometimes, when words weren't enough, she would squeeze my hand, and I would squeeze back, both of us silently promising that no matter how complicated it was, we had each other now. And yet, there was always the tension, the fragile line between longing and restraint. I could feel it in the way her gaze lingered on my lips when we spoke, in the way I found myself leaning closer than necessary, craving a nearness that words couldn't satisfy. There were moments when the air grew heavy with unspoken desire, when the world seemed to pause as if waiting for us to take that final step. One such night we sat by her window, the city stretched out in glowing silence. She had her arm around the back of my chair, and I leaned slightly into her warmth. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she whispered, "Do you regret it? Coming back to me?" I turned to her, my heart thudding. "No, not for a second. Being with you feels right. For the first time in my life I feel like I belong somewhere. With someone." Her expression faltered, caught between joy and sorrow, and then she pulled me closer until our foreheads touched. I closed my eyes, tears slipping free as I whispered, "This is love, isn't it?" She pressed her lips to my forehead again, lingering there. "Yes," she murmured. "This is love." And in that moment I finally believed it. That night, the silence between us felt different. Thicker, heavier, full of unspoken emotions that demanded to be heard. I sat on her couch, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. For the first time I admitted aloud, "I don't know how long I can keep living like this, pretending I'm fine when I'm not." She moved closer without hesitation, her hand reaching up to brush my tears away. The softness of her touch undid me. I leaned into her palm, my body trembling as her thumb lingered against my skin. "You don't have to pretend with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not ever." Her arms came around me, pulling me into the safest embrace I had ever known. My face pressed against her shoulder, and I felt her warmth seep into me like sunlight after years of cold. She stroked my hair slowly, gently, as though each touch was a vow she had been waiting years to make. When I finally pulled back, our eyes locked, and the air shifted. I could see it there, the longing she had buried for so long, the same longing that had been quietly growing inside me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, almost without thinking, I leaned in. Our lips met. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was deep, emotional, and achingly tender. Her lips trembled against mine, as though afraid I might pull away. But I didn't. I pressed closer, feeling the world fall silent around us. That kiss carried years of silence, of missed chances, of everything we had been too afraid to say. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her voice trembling. "I've loved you for so long." My heart shattered and healed all at once. I cupped her face in my hands, searching her eyes. "And I love you too. I think I always did, I just didn't know how to name it." Her lips curved into the faintest smile before she kissed me again, this time slower, fuller, her hands sliding gently to hold me closer. I felt her fingers trace the line of my back, every touch careful, reverent, as though I were something precious she had been entrusted with. My hands tangled in her hair, pulling her nearer, refusing to let go. The kiss deepened, our breaths mingling, our hearts beating in rhythm. There was passion, yes, but it was wrapped in care, in tenderness, in the kind of love that doesn't just want but cherishes. When we paused, I whispered against her lips, "I wish you had told me sooner." Her eyes glistened as she answered, "Sometimes silence kills love, but look at us now. Speaking it has given us a new beginning." She kissed me once more, slow and lingering, as if sealing that truth between us. And in that moment, I knew it didn't matter how much time had been lost. What mattered was that we had finally found each other, not in silence, but in love spoken aloud, in touch, in care, in the promise of something real. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was living in her arms, in her love.